Well, happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the Sabbath service for this morning, the 17th day of the 11th month on God's holy sacred calendar. It's the 27th day of January 2024 on that Roman calendar. And brethren, hope you had a good night's sleep and are refreshed and ready for a Sabbath service this morning where we worship God. We take a little bit of a look at what's happened in the news this past week up until today, and we hear from God's end-time apostle and servant as he answers a question today: what is the origin of man's law? So that's what we're going to be covering in services today, and we're going to start it off this morning in hymn before God to praise and honor the great God, thank Him for this day of rest that He set aside for us so that man can't bullywog all over us, at least too much, over much, because, we tell our employers, sorry, bub, we ain't working 7 days a week. God made a day for rest. He made it to be the seventh day of the week, and we take time out to do that and to praise and worship our great God. By the way, I do have last night's Bible study now on our website. Among other things that were going wacko yesterday and last night, after our Bible study, where I usually right away index the Bible study onto our archive video page, the company that hosts our website was down for maintenance last night, and they didn't have it back on until 6 o'clock this morning. So for those of you in the United Kingdom, I got up at 6 o'clock our local time in Alabama last night, or early this morning, and the website was finally back up. The hosting service was back up that hosts our website, and I was able to index the Bible study. I know some of you in the United Kingdom use the Bible study in the morning for your Sabbath morning service, and you usually, some of you've told me you tune in, you just have a habit of bringing it up at 10:30 in the morning. Well, I'm sorry, we weren't there till about noon your time because our web service people had us down for their maintenance. But as soon as they got it up, I crawled out of my bed early this morning and indexed it and put it online. So it's online there. Now, the one thing I noticed on the home page, we've got the archive video page updated. You can find last night's Bible study from the archive of video page. On our home page, where we usually show it in the second window down from the top, well, wait a minute. Maybe I did get that fixed. Yeah, I think we did get the Bible study in there. So we're good. The only thing we have to do is put today's Sabbath service in the third window down and then on the archive video page. And everything's back up, so I can do that like we normally do about an hour after we sign off from the live stream. Okay, let's go ahead and sing praise to God. And then we're going to hear early from God's end-time apostle. And then I have some things I want to share with you that relate to what we were going over last night about God's calendar and how well we should know and understand that calendar. But brethren, so you can participate in service, all of us together, and so that Some of us in the United States, at least, it's afternoon. It's 2:30 in the afternoon for those of you in the United Kingdom, 4:30 in certain parts of the Middle East, including Israel. For us in the United States on the West Coast, it's just a little bit after 7:30 in the morning. Where I am, it's a little after 9:30 in the morning. On the East Coast, it's a great time for Sabbath service, a little after 10:30 a.m. in the morning. And we got on just a few minutes late this morning. I apologize for that, but wouldn't you know, with everything else happening, one of the services we use wanted to update their software on us this morning. And so I had to let that software that we need to use, I had to let it update. But let's stop now, sing a song of praise. We're together, we're here. It is the Sabbath. We don't have to work today. We can rest and worship God. He set this day aside as a day of worship to remember our Creator and to give Him praise for the many wonderful blessings. Stop and think as you sing, brethren, about the many blessings He gives you, He gives me. Even though we have to work and struggle, we're overcoming and qualifying to reign and rule as one of the kings and priest in God's kingdom. Let's give Him praise for that. That means all those people that bug us and give us a hard time today, you know, and give our fellow brothers of descendants of Jacob, Israel, a hard time today. They're going to find out we are ruling the roost after Jesus Christ returns, and we're learning now to do it in love, or else we won't be there as one of the rulers, because Christ wants people who walk as He walked, with a lot of love, a lot of humility, a lot of care and concern for others. That's why we're told to watch the daily news and pray always, pray without ceasing for the people adversely affected in today's news. And we're going to talk about some of the people in today's world news are actually half brothers of ours. They're actually related to us, some of the people that are giving us the hardest time today. But let's sing praise to God. We'll get around to most of those things today, and including especially hearing God's end-time most faithful servant and apostle answer the question, what is the origin of the law of man? All right, with the idea of singing praise to God, we're going to go to Psalm 9. From the purple hymnal, the lyrics will scroll on the screen as we sing. Everybody together on verse 1. Verse 3, everybody. right, brethren, thank you very much to all of you who sang along with us this morning. I want to give a special happy Sabbath greeting to Willie out there. Thanks for being with us live here, Willie, and to Walter up in Newfoundland, Canada. And I hope you got my note to you, Walter. I got the anointed cloth off in the mail to you on Thursday morning. Walter asked me for an anointed cloth. I'll tell you about that later, especially after I ask Walter if I can give you his full name and ask you to pray for him. It's not life-threatening, but it is something that God does heal, has healed, will heal, and it's something Walter would like to have healed. The post office told me, because you're in Newfoundland, Canada, that the mail will, they didn't know for sure, but I looked online and the Canadian postal people said it'll take about 4 to 7 days for that letter, first-class letter with an anointed cloth enclosed, to arrive at your destination, at your home in Newfoundland, Canada. 4 to 7 days from Thursday. So you should have it by next Sabbath. In fact, you may have it Thursday or Friday next Sabbath. Well, 4 to 7 days. You could even have it as early as Friday, Sabbath, Sunday, Monday. You could have it as early as Monday next week. But then on the other hand, it could be Thursday or Friday. Or even, since they're not sure about how long it takes, and they just gave a rough estimate on the Canadian Postal Service, not allowing for hard freezes and things that might slow things down. Anyway, by next Sabbath, Walter, I believe you'll have that by next Sabbath if you give me the okay to pass the word for you of what you would appreciate being healed. I know that Jacob Holst in California doesn't mind my asking your prayers for healing of a condition that is like a shortage in the brain, just something where something physical in the brain is not matched up quite right. There's a short that God can heal. Nutrition can help heal it, and God can miraculously heal it. But if God does heal things, he also wants us to eating the right foods that will help keep that condition from occurring again. If you've got a tendency towards something because of physical things in your family, in your life, by your family, I mean your what's the word? Genetics, your family bloodline, and things that sometimes we just inherit from former patriarchs above us as their ancestors. So, but God can intervene for us on those things, and he even does some extremely miraculous things. As Walter is aware and repeated to me that God healed this in a gal, I want this healing myself. And according to your faith, Walter, I pray God will grant that to you. And if you give me the okay, I'll share that with other brethren, because part of James 5, beginning in verse 14, that instructs us on what to do when we are sick, to call the elders and ask them to anoint us and pray over us. And it goes further. That's just part 1. Part 2 is totally on you. Of course, part 1's on you too. You've got to seek out the elder and ask him to do that for you. And then the second part is you've got to seek out your fellow brethren. And sometimes a reason why God might allow some of us to be sick is because some of our fellow brethren either need to be in fellowship with you, you need that, they need that. It brings you together when you have to ask other people to pray for you. I'm having this physical problem, some ailment, some disease. Will you please pray for me? Well, that gets people's attention. They realize you are hurting. They empathize with you. They draw closer to you. They get on their knees. They pray for you. You get to know that person. You follow up. You see who follows up with you to find out how you're doing later. And that's a part of what God wants. Now, that's above and beyond the minister. You're supposed to do that yourself. Now, in isolated situations, sometimes maybe the minister will, go a step further for you and ask other people to to do some praying for you and help you get in contact with people so that you have a network of people that you could then call yourself when you're in trouble with an ailment or anything else where you just might need encouragement, or someone else might need encouragement. You might know it. You might want to contact them and check on your brethren. And when they're discouraged and need encouragement or need prayer for this or that, it's great. There is a scripture, I'll see if I can find it by next week, that talks about the value of our keeping up fellowship privately among ourselves with our fellow brethren. And part of the healing instruction, beginning in about verse 16, 17 of James 5, after in verse 14 where it says, call upon the elders of the church for the anointing, and they're praying over you. It then says, you contact your fellow brethren and confess your sins, your faults. Now, by that doesn't mean tell them every sin you've ever done. That's actually in the context of healing. Somebody sinned, whether it was you or somebody else that got you sick or that caused the situation and condition you're having. And it might just be degenerative. But tell your brethren your faults, your shortcomings, what you need, what you'd like to have God heal that He's healed before in the past for others, and which encourages your faith. And ask your fellow brethren, like God instructs us to do, to pray for you. That is part of it. You don't just go to the minister, get an anointed cloth. Oh, I didn't get healed. Well, did you ask anybody else to pray for you? Well, no, but I'm coming back and I'm going to ask you for another anointed cloth. Well, you're really overdoing it. Once you ask for it for a specific thing, the one time, for the anointing, that should be it. Now, for repeated prayers, yes, just like Elijah went before God 7 times in prayer when they had famine for 3.5 years, and they needed rain. They needed relief from that drought, no water. And when Elijah really went fervently before God and there were no clouds in the sky, well, he went back again. Next day there were no clouds. He went back fervently before God again. And it says 7 times. And on the 7th time, here comes a little cloud in the sky. And so, does Elijah quit there? No, he goes back before God and gives thanks. He doesn't have to beg for rain anymore. He sees a little cloud. He says, hey, Father, you're answering the prayer. Here it comes. Let the whole fullness of the heavens fill up with clouds and rain. I see it coming. You've sent a signal, that little cloud. And so he gave God thanks, and God followed through and brought the rest of the clouds and the full rain, and the 3.5 years of drought was over. You can read about that. It's introduced in the rest of James 5 after he says, go to your brethren, ask them for prayer. And he says, the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth what, brethren? A little bit, a little dab of, real cream will do you? No, he does the full healing. He'll give it to you. And so we need to do that for one another. Make those effectual, fervent prayers for our brethren. And he explained how Elijah went before and asked for the rain. And that's more fully elaborated in the rest of the Bible when it gives all the details of how Elijah sought God for relief from the drought with fervent prayers. And God responded to those fervent prayers. So we need to be doing that for one another, especially in the world and in the situation that we are in today. Well, brethren, I'm going to take us early to God's end-time apostle, Herbert Einstein. Let me just make sure. We did cover the date. I didn't have this graphic last night. Thank you, Mr. Joe. I know you did this some time ago, and we did an update, but I'm having a problem getting those updates to open up. I know I have one graphic program that will convert my Paint Shop Pro files, what are they initialize those at PSP? My PSP files, can be converted to Paint Shop, to Photoshop. They can be converted to Photoshop's PSD files. However, they won't open. Once I convert them to PSD, that's it. You got to have a program that'll open a PSD. So when I receive a PSD file, I have no software that'll open it. Now I know I've been told by some people about some free software that will work that, but phew, my computer and me are in overload. So for me to load a new program and learn it right now, even if it's simple, I'm in overload. I've taken on a third job, and I worked that third job up until, like I mentioned to you at the Bible study last night, up until 1 minute before sunset. Sunset here in Alabama last night was, where I am, it was 5:13 p.m. I worked until 5:12, and when I saw the clock and I knew the sunset time, when I saw 5:12 and I had just finished something, I said, "That's it, Steve, don't do any more, shut it down, pick it back up after the Sabbath's over." So I did that. Now I notice we're getting a live stream yellow light that's telling us our live streaming signal is on the fuzz. So I'm going to shut down everything I have open that could be affecting that. Good, we just got it back to a green light. So I had something going on in that other computer that was stealing our bandwidth, but we fixed it. So, all right, we have to be resourceful. That is one of the laws of success, and that's something we're learning, and that we're going to have to use and carry with us throughout the millennium, because, you know, we're not going to be taking a vacation once Christ returns. We're going to be helping do things after the millennium. We're going to be helping do things out in the universe, and for a whole eternity. And we're going to have to be persevere with some things, be resourceful. We'll have boundless energy. That'll be nice. I notice we're getting that yellow light again. What else do I possibly have stealing bandwidth from us here? All right, I'll figure that out. I'll try to figure that out while Mr. Armstrong is speaking. So here we are. This is the 17th day of the 11th month. I'll get that figured out while Mr. Armstrong is speaking. I do want to come back and focus our attention a little bit more on the calendar, especially since this is an extended year this year, and be able to share with you some things that we need to know and understand. God's calendar. That is going to be the calendar of the future. And so we're just going to touch lightly on a few things related to the calendar. But first, we're going to go over to God's end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong, and he's going to answer the question about the origins of man's law.
Is it possible that all churches and religion in the United States could be banished or regulated by the federal government as it was in the Soviet Union? A Wall Street lawyer says in a national magazine that we could lose all religious freedom if the present government course continues. In that article, this lawyer is quoted as saying, increasing attempts to regulate churches are in violation of the Constitution. Now, such an attempt was made January the 3rd, 1979, against the Worldwide Church of God, which sponsors this program. We had to fight the battle to preserve the Constitution of the United States, separating church and state.
Okay, to your satisfaction.
Courts have to understand that we're not going to give up.
Therefore, the Ambassador Foundation, one of the corporate entities of the Worldwide Church of God, contributed to the establishment of a professorship in constitutional law at the very prestigious University of Southern California Law School. Now, the University of Southern California, or USC as it ordinarily is designated, is one of America's foremost universities in many areas of sports, such as football, many baseball players in the big leagues are USC graduates who got their baseball training at the University of Southern California. Also, they've won many track meets, many United States track meets. They've been very prominent in many areas. But of all, there is nothing more prestigious than their very famous law school, one of the most prestigious law schools in the United States. Now, on March 31st at USC, a special ceremony was held to establish that professorship.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the USC campus for what is a truly memorable day in the history of our university and our law center. The establishment of professorships such as we are marking today is among the most important events that occurs in the life of a university. It marks the creation of an endowment that will go on in perpetuity to support teaching and scholarly publication at the university. These endowments that we mark today are more permanent than any of the buildings that will ever be built on this campus, and they're more important. They mark a tangible commitment to support of the values for which a university really exists. We are delighted that you could be with us today to mark this occasion. Two special introductions that I'd like to make. First of all, we are delighted to have back on campus our continuing colleague, although not on a full-time basis, and my predecessor, who was Dean of the Law School when our two honorees today were recruited to the faculty, the Honorable Dorothy Nelson. Dorothy? And we're also pleased to have with us a good friend of the Law Center, our colleague and longtime helper in our endowment efforts, good friend, Vice President Carl Franklin. Carl? The president of our university is a distinguished scientist and an experienced academic leader. It's an honor to have him with us today to mark the establishment of these two professorships, and I am pleased indeed to introduce the president of the University of Southern California, Dr. James H. Zumberg.
Dean Vice, Judge Nelson, distinguished guests, honorees. The university ceremonies held to establish formally endowed professorships and to install their holders celebrate and honor the accomplishments of three different groups: the gracious and generous benefactors who provide the endowment for the professorships, the persons for whom the professorships are named, and the renowned and able scholars who are to be installed as the holders of the professorships. We therefore meet to honor three groups of people who are most significant in the life of our university and its distinguished law center. It is my privilege and honor to speak about the first two groups, the benefactors and the persons for whom the chairs are named. Their commitment to the future of private university legal education has made this day possible. Now, your program notes tell you a great deal about each of today's benefactors and honorees. I only wish to add a word or two. The university became acquainted with Leon Benwell when a university administrator asked our vice president for legal affairs if we could invest some time and resources in an effort to assist an alumnus in distress. USC has long maintained a close relationship with its alumni, and we were pleased to do what we could to put this person in touch with those who might assist him further. The assistance included such things as working with our attorneys, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the government prosecutors in reclaiming what was rightfully Mr. Benwell's. Through this association, we learned of Leon Benwell's strong belief that legal service and education should be affordable to all, and of the commitment of the Benwell Foundation to these ideals. Happily, we were able to recover Mr. Benwell's property, and because of his university's concern over his plight and its part in resolving his difficulties, Mr. Benwell became a generous supporter of our programs, and through his will, he funded the professorship we established today. Though Leon Benwell cannot be with us, his bequest is a permanent testimonial to the values of educational opportunity and excellence he espoused. Peoples throughout the nation, indeed throughout the entire world, are familiar with the ministry and accomplishments of Herbert W. Armstrong, a dynamic religious leader whose voice and countenance are recognizable to millions around the world. Mr. Armstrong is well known to many as an official ambassador of world peace. He has met privately with such leaders as Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain, Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi of India, Presidents Anwar Sadat and Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, King Hussein of Jordan, and the King of Thailand, all in an effort to further world peace and religious liberty. Mr. Armstrong has long admired the commitment to religious liberty evidenced by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and he has been an outspoken defender of constitutional liberty. Thus, when the Ambassador International Cultural Foundation agreed to fund a professorship in Mr. Armstrong's honor, it was Mr. Armstrong's personal wish that the professorship be in constitutional law. The success of the Ambassador International Cultural Foundation, like that of the Worldwide Church of God and Ambassador College, reflects the enormous energy and dedication of its founder, Herbert W. Armstrong. It also reflects the dedication and generosity of tens of thousands of contributors worldwide, persons inspired by Mr. Armstrong's message. Thus, Mr. Armstrong is both benefactor and honoree, for he has inspired both gift and givers. We're delighted that Mr. Armstrong could be with us today to mark this significant event in the history of our university. He has graciously consented to say a few words to us, and so I am now honored and pleased to introduce the Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong.
Mr. President, and ladies and gentlemen, you might wonder what I, a minister of Jesus Christ, would have to do with constitutional law and something of this sort. Last night, I viewed a movie on television about a Philadelphia lawyer. Perhaps some of you might have seen it. And I was interested in that because when I was a little boy, 5 years old, my father told me that when I grew up, I would become a Philadelphia lawyer. I asked him so many crazy questions, he got so tired of answering why and how and all of the questions I wanted to know because I wanted to understand, that he said I would certainly become a Philadelphia lawyer when I grew up. Well, now, in a way you might not understand, his prophecy was really fulfilled. In 1926, I was challenged on a point of constitutional law. And at that time, I found a great deal about constitutional law in a book that I don't know whether you'll find it in very many law libraries. It's a book called the Holy Bible. But I found a lot about constitutional law in it. In fact, I found that constitutional law was the subject of that book from beginning to end, and it's quite a large book. And we live in a world today, I was introduced as being called an ambassador without portfolio because I represent no nation in this regard, but an ambassador for world peace. And that's true, I do work for world peace. But I found that we live in a very peculiar type of world, a world with a very peculiar paradox. It's a world of absolutely awesome progress and accomplishment, and at the same time, a world of appalling evils and troubles that seem unsolvable, violence, destruction, everything harmful and wrong. It's a world in which people are not getting along with people. And that's why we have constitutional law. That's what our courts and our lawyers are concerned about constantly, adjusting disputes among people. Now, I happen to know all of the members of the World Court of International Justice at The Hague, and I've spoken to them, trying to straighten out difficulties between nations. The unfortunate thing is that that court cannot compel any disputes between nations to be brought before it, and even if disputes are voluntarily brought before it, it has no teeth, it cannot enforce its decisions. However, they have told me that what problems have been brought before them have been followed by the nations concerned, and that at least is encouraging. But why do we find these troubles in the world? It all started at the beginning of the world. The foundation of this world, as recorded in this book, which is not highly regarded by higher education in this world, unfortunately. And that records in the incident of the forbidden fruit at the very beginning, at the foundation of this world, that our first parents took to themselves a matter of constitutional law, the knowledge of good and evil. Now, good and evil is a type of knowledge that is not concerned with the building of airplanes or sending men to the moon and back, or producing computers, or the things of modern science. It is concerned with relationships between people and relationships between people and their maker. But the first parents took to themselves the knowledge of good and evil, of deciding what is right and what is wrong. And incidentally, people just didn't agree on what is right and what is wrong. What one thinks is right, another thinks is wrong. And the self motive entered in. And people began to think selfishly. And so a civilization has been built, and based on attitudes of competition. Now, the basic book of constitutional law states that the basis of all law is just a simple word, L-O-V-E, love. I like to translate that as it is put into practice in the world today into the word get, and the opposite is the word give. That is, love is the word give, and get is the opposite in the transgression of that law. Now, that is a law, and incidentally, a law is merely the rules of how you perform. You might say that the rules of a game, a basketball game or a football game, are merely the law of the game, because a law defines conduct. And so man has formed his own ideas about the way of life and how he conducts himself with his neighbor, how groups conduct themselves with other groups, how nations conduct themselves with other nations. It's a competitive society, not one of cooperation and love. Human nature entered into it, and of course we are not going to have peace. I may be an ambassador for world peace, I do what I can, but we're not going to have peace in the world. There's no need of kidding ourselves until human nature is changed and until the spirit and attitude of love instead of hate and competition, of cooperation and give enters in instead of get and competition and strife and self-motive. And so it has come along in our time. And now we're having great difficulty in solving human problems. Students are taught here to act as either defenders or prosecutors in cases of misconduct or of disputes among people, and to become judges in courts. And of course, in this particular department that we're concerned about here this afternoon, of constitutional law. But all human rights are based on the law that I found in this book, the Holy Bible. And I wonder if people realize that. The law of love. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There's so little of that in this world. Now, in that book, the Holy Bible, in the second and third chapters of the last book in it, the book of Revelation, sometimes called the Apocalypse in Catholic circles, is a prophecy by Jesus Christ himself of the future of the church in its 7 epochs or eras, 7 periods of time. We are now in the Philadelphia era. And so it came that I found sin is the transgression of the law. That's the definition of sin. Jesus Christ came to die for people's sins. And sin is the transgression of the law. And it all has something to do with law, which is a way of life. I came to be the leader in the Philadelphia era of that church. And so here I am among lawyers and in a university with such a great reputation in its law school as a Philadelphia lawyer. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong. I know I speak for my colleagues in the legal profession when I say that we're glad you took other pursuits, because your competition in our business would have been too hard for any of us to handle. You honor us by being here today, sir, and we thank you.
You know, I talk to many heads of state all over the world, and I talk to them about world conditions. Right now, the world's #1 problem is that of survival, because the weapons of mass destruction exist that can erase all humanity from the face of the earth for the first time in world history, and that has only been true in, since World War II. In just recent years. It never had happened before. And yet world peace is coming. I talk with the heads of government. We talk about world peace, and they're all facing problems they're totally unable to cope with. They don't know how world peace will come. And yet many world-famous scientists have said that the only hope for world peace would be one great world nation with one military force only that could bring us world peace. But would it? In the hands of men, it's impossible in the first place. And would it even bring us peace if we had it? I have a booklet I would like to have you read on that line, and that is World Peace, How It Will Come. And you know we're going to have world peace. World peace is coming. that it isn't coming the way people think. I'd like to send you a copy of this booklet. No charge, just gratis, it's free. We have nothing to sell, but we would like to help toward world peace, and we'd like to help inform you of the way world peace is going to come. That's part of our work. It's our contribution to the good of humanity. Now, there's no charge. There's not going to be any request for money whatsoever. Write in for this booklet, this very special booklet. It's brief. You can read it at one sitting, but it's very, very important, and you've never heard anything like it. World peace, how it will come. You need to know about it. Until next time, this is Herbert W. Armstrong. Goodbye, friends.
All right, brethren, as I so often say, thank you to the great God for preserving the recordings of his end times most faithful servant and apostle, Herbert W. Armstrong, while he spoke on telecast, broadcast, Bible studies, sermons that we're able to review today and air here on cogtv.org, sabbath.tv. And you know, he opened this telecast by, I'm going to repeat just the first few words of Mr. Armstrong, because I think something we need to focus on that's in today's news. Mr. Armstrong was answering while he was alive. You know, he died this month in January, on January 16 on the Roman calendar, 38 years ago now. And a little more than 40 years ago, when he was speaking live and on television, he was answering a question that's more relevant today than it was at the time he was speaking it when he was alive. Let's hear his opening words here again, just for a moment, just for a minute or two.
Is it possible that all churches and religion in the United States could be banished or regulated by the federal government as it was in the Soviet Union?
All right, brethren, I'm going to stop it again. Stop it right there. You know, one of the things in the news of late it has been reports that the current administration of the United States is doing several things to work against the interests of religious organizations. I got a notice in the mail just this past week from my bank related to our church ministry account that the federal government is seeking information regarding who owns or who controls business accounts that relate to religions. And, you know, we have in our Constitution a thing of separation of church and state, that the real intent as we study it and learn it, like if you go to law school, you find out, you know, constitutional law, you go back to what the original founders of the Constitution were thinking at the time they wrote the Constitution. When they set up a doctrine of separation of church and state, they were intending that the government would not rule over religion. Now, of course, there was an assumption that religion would be conducted by men who were faithful to, I was going to say their religion, but their religion can be something that men set up that can be crazy and totally ungodly, unfortunately. And that works against the interest of those who are faithfully serving their God. But the original intent in the Constitution by the founders, as we study it and learn it and as it's properly taught, was that the founders were saying to the government, keep your hands off religion. You know, that's not supposed to be within the confines of government ruling over religion, or government picking a religion that it honors and says everybody needs to worship this way. No, God set up religious freedom here so that His work could have a base from which it could, without boundaries, teach the truth. We're seeing that being capped more and more, and we're looking at a time just ahead of us that's going to precede a time mentioned in the book of Daniel at chapter 12, verse 11, that refers to a time that's 1,290 years, not years, days, refers to a time that's 1,290 days before Christ returns, and 45 days before that. I don't have a graphic for it yet. I'll need to produce one. At a time known as the 1335, there's going to be a famine of God's true word. Now that's the way God's end-time apostle taught us, and when you check up in Scripture, you see, oh, yeah, that's exactly what would be happening at that period of time. 45 days before a government organization out of Europe will go into Jerusalem and stop the daily sacrifices. Now, those daily sacrifices have not yet been reinstituted, but they will be because of this prophecy that's in Daniel 12, verse 11. They will send in an army, and it'll stop the daily sacrifice, and it will surround Jerusalem. I want to punch up a verse from Daniel chapter 8, verse 11 and verse 12, so we can put it on the screen here for you. Here's the verse in Daniel 8, verse 11 that mentions the daily sacrifice that's being taken away. And brethren, we need to be aware of this. Talk about calendars and talk about time. This is something we should definitely be aware of. Yea, he magnifies himself. Well, you got to back up a few verses to clarify in Scripture who's being talked about here. Let's go back to, let me see how far back we need to go. I don't think we have to go back beyond the first verses of this same chapter 8 of Daniel. Let's go right back. Let's go back to verse 1, where it says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me," Daniel speaking, Daniel who wrote the book of Daniel under God's inspiration. "A vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last." You know, there's a lot of duality in prophecy, and God speaks of sometimes the last being first. And in this case, in this verse 3 of Daniel 8, there's 2 horns, and the one that comes up later is higher. It's more grandiose. It's greater than the one that went before it. There was these 2 little horns. One was bigger than the other. One was smaller than the other. The smaller, earlier horn, representing the leader of a religious organization, well, it was powerful. It ruled and reigned over a beast. And yet, by comparison, what God is saying here, by comparison, the horn that rises up higher, that comes last, that comes in the last days, in the latter time, in our time today, is going to be more grandiose, greater, bigger, more colossal. What's coming ahead of us during the Great Tribulation is described by God in Matthew 24 and verse 21. Let's go there for a moment. If you got your Bible open, brethren, and I hope you do, let me do this. I forgot to mark that verse. That's okay. I've got Daniel 8:11 marked, so we can easily come back to verse 11 and backtrack around to verse 1 again. I'm already into the place where I punch up another scripture, so we're going to Matthew 24 and verse 21, and we may back up to verse 20 here for a moment for a reason. But this great tribulation that's ahead of us is mentioned here in Scripture, as you can see on your screen, as a time of trouble. It's so great that nothing since the beginning of the world, as Matthew quotes Christ here in chapter 24 and verse 21. For then shall be great tribulation. How great? Such as was not since yesterday, No, it doesn't say that, Stephen. It says, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor ever shall be. Brethren, I hope you don't mind I do that once in a while. I sometimes purposely, misread something in a scripture just to see if you're awake, especially when I got it on the screen in front of you. And hopefully you'll, instead of just glossing over it, you'll say, hey, wait a minute, Stephen, this thing says this trouble that's coming is so great that there's no trouble since the beginning of the world to this time coming. Nothing ever before it's going to be as bad as what's coming in the Great Tribulation. Great Tribulation, as many of you know, is a time that's referenced by God that comes with the commencement of the fifth seal. Now, the fifth seal, God's end-time apostle has announced, will be the next major event in prophecy. Now, the seven seals give a chronology of prophecy. Right now, there are 4 seals that are active. And those 4 seals, as you see them pictured here on your screen over on the left side of this graphic shows the 7 seals. The 7th seal on the right side of the graphic takes up more than half the screen, because the 7th seal, it's divided into 7 trumpets. And then the 7th trumpet is divided even further into 7 more elements. The 7th trumpet has the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues. So as part of this 7th seal, you've got 14 elements, where most of the other seals basically only have 1 element each to them. Now, yes, the 4th seal that is active, there are 4 manners of death that are covered by the 4th seal, the one seal, seal number 4. There's death by primarily disease epidemics, as Christ used the term loimos, L-O-I-M-O-S, as we spell it out in English, the Greek word. He also mentioned there would be death by seismos, S-E-I-S-M-O-S. That's 2 of the forms of death. The 4th seal is depicted by a pale horse with a rider on that horse named Death. So there's more than disease epidemic to the 4th seal. It's death. It's death primarily by disease epidemic, but there are a lot of people going to die by seismic activity on the earth too. Earthquakes, and seismos covers more than earthquakes. Unfortunately, the King James Version of the Bible only renders seismos as earthquakes. But if you look up the word seismos, the original Greek word in those scriptures that reference earthquake, you'll see that the word seismos means much more than just earthquake. It means volcanic eruptions, it means tidal waves, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, any form of seismic activity on the earth, including not only commotions on the ground, but commotions in the air, such as gale force winds of all kinds, tornadoes, typhoons, hurricanes, all that kind of thing. All that's part of the death by the 4th seal. So is death by wild animals. So is death by terake, a word Christ used for this death, explaining in plain language the 4th seal of Revelation. But it's only mentioned in that one book of Mark, in chapter 13, verse 8, terake, meaning mobs, seditions, death by mob seditions, and just general trouble, but not your major trouble not your great trouble of the 5th seal, just trouble that's the beginning of sorrows, that leads up to the Great Tribulation. But when the Great Tribulation comes, it's like, you heard of a dam that has a little hole in it, and they plug up the hole. Okay, now you got the hole stopped. It's just a small leak, but of course, if you leave that leak going, it causes lots of trouble. But it's nothing like the whole dam bursting. Well, the 5th seal is going to be like a dam bursting. Not a dam bursting, but a dam bursting. And the whole valley down below, for miles is flooded and wiped out. I mean, the Great Tribulation, just like it says in this, like Christ says here in the verse recorded by Matthew in chapter 24, verse 21, that Great Tribulation is a time of trouble such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, and no nor ever after means nothing after it ever again is going to be as bad. So we haven't seen that time yet. Some people, it's hard to believe, some people are saying, oh yeah, the Great Tribulation's already here. Duh. No, you're just talking about a leak, a leak in the dam. You ain't seen that dam burst yet. When you see the dam burst, we're talking about ensuing trouble like you can't believe. That trouble includes what Christ prophesied through Ezekiel in chapter 6 and verse 6. While we're diverting, let's go over there and take a look at that for a moment. Brethren, we need to be awake. And I so often ask God when I do these live streams to inspire my speaking to you, and I hope that you pray that for me too, and that not only that, you ask God to open up your ears and hear what you need to hear that God is saying to you. And we all should be hearing this. Look, through Ezekiel, God is speaking primarily to the offspring of Jacob through his son Joseph, through his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who received the birthright promise. And those descendants being largely in the United States and United Kingdom today, respectively, Ephraim, Manasseh. And in this prophecy through Ezekiel, in chapter 6, verse 6, God says, in all your dwelling places, the cities shall prosper and be safe and wonderful places to live. Well, we know that's not true today. Our cities are some of the most dangerous places to go. You need to get out of the city, get into a safe place, get as far out of the city as you can. But what's coming in prophecy is predicted in this verse. Look at it, is this: the cities shall be laid waste. What does that mean? Laid waste? That's like they shall be razed to the ground and utterly destroyed. Well, how can that be? Well, where are we right now in time, in prophecy, brethren? Are we not in the last days? And are we not in the time of that generation that Jesus Christ spoke of, that's recorded by Matthew, I think in about verse 34, is it? I'm going to open up a electronic concordance real quick. I'm going to put in the two words, generation pass. I think that'll clue us in on the one verse. Yeah, it is verse 34. Let me go back to Matthew on the screen here. I think I saved that. Yep, we did. I've got Matthew 24:21 here, and from there we can just change the verse to 34. If you want to turn over there in your Bible with me, this is a very important verse. You should probably circle this verse if you haven't already in your Bible. Christ said, verily, truly, truly, verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Now there's two things mentioned in this verse we need to understand. What is this generation? And when is the time period of, quote unquote, this generation? The other thing we need to look at is till all these things be fulfilled. What? What all? What all things be fulfilled? Well, the things you read in the previous verses of this same chapter, which could be a good Bible study for you to pursue on your own for the afternoon part of the Sabbath if you're in the United States. Now, I know it's already afternoon in the United Kingdom, but still, you could make this a Bible study this week, but especially good on the Sabbath. You still have a little bit of time. The days are starting to get longer again. You still have a little bit of time in the United Kingdom after we sign off. It's still the Sabbath. And a good Bible study might be to go entirely through all of the verses of Matthew 24, which is one of three chapters that reveal the Olivet prophecy, enumerate, that elaborate, that record the Olivet prophecy that Jesus Christ spoke from the Mount of Olives, and it's because he spoke there, it's referred to as the Olivet. You know, it just means the Mount of Olives, the prophecy. And in that prophecy, Christ was answering a question of the disciples in which he was explaining the seals of Revelation in plain language. They were asking, when would be the sign of your return? And he was saying, when these seals of Revelation chronologically work out, when they happen, then know that his return is at the gates, pretty close, right down the road. You got to go through the 1335, the 1290, the 1260 days until Christ's return, and then boom, I'm here. Now that clock, that countdown clock that starts at 1335 has not begun yet. We're still able to talk to you on the internet, but when that 1335 hits, we had problems last night that reminded me, and should remind you too, hey, there's going to be a time when you tune in for a Friday night Bible study or a Sabbath service, and it's not going to be a matter of just either being late or we had some sign-on problem, our hosting service delayed us, disabled something, we had to get re-enabled. No, we won't come on at all. We just flat won't be there because we'll have been shut down by some government ruling agency, whether it be internationally from something that United Europe does after it grows into an organization just preceding the ascending of the beast out of the abyss, which some people over there understand. They know. Angela Merkel spoke of it in 2019 to the shock and amazement of yours truly, and maybe some of you too, when we reported it, with her saying, "You people better look into the abyss." I heard that and I said, Mrs. Merkel, do you realize what you're saying? And I said to myself, her father was an evangelical preacher in East Germany as she was growing up. Yeah, she's read in her Bible about the abyss. And she even understands that beast in the abyss is a world-ruling emperor, as they had in Europe for so many years, 1,260 years of an emperor ruling the world under the authority of the Holy Roman Empire, under the authority of the Vatican, where the Pope would go over to Frankfurt, Germany, to the second floor of the Romer building there, which although we destroyed that building toward the end of World War II, well, thanks to the good old Americans and the Marshall Fund, American tax-paying dollars, rebuilt that Romer building according to its original architectural plans. The building was blown up, but they had the architectural plans somewhere else. And so the people of the United States were able to get their hands on those architectural plans, and at our expense, we rebuilt that German building, gave it to Germany, the Romer building, and we exactly to the original architectural plans. Well, what's the big deal about that, Stephen? Well, on the second floor of that building is what's called the Emperor's Hall. In German, the German language, they call it the Kaiser's Hall. Kaiser means emperor, all means hall, and so it's the Kaiser's Hall is the Emperor's Hall, and in that hall, that Emperor's Hall, is the place where they hold the coronation ceremonies for kings and the emperors of the old Holy Roman Empire. Now, why would we rebuild that for Germany? Well, we probably didn't even understand or know why, but, God perhaps oversaw it and said, well, out of all this wealth I've given the United States, I'm going to make sure this building is back in position so that prophecy can be fulfilled. Because let's look at that. Let's go over. This is important, brethren, that you know where we are in time and not be diluted by those who are telling you we're already in the Laodicean era, which contradicts the truth that God taught us through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, that era as an era would not formally begin until the commencement of the fifth seal, which begins just after those who are accounted worthy to escape are flown to a place of nourishment, protection, safety, final training. I just punched up the wrong chapter. I punched up 12. 12 is an important chapter of Revelation to know. I'm going over to Revelation chapter 17. We'll begin in verse 8. We'll also go to verse 10. And let me get verse 8 on the screen, because verse 8, Revelation 17, is a verse that tells us that the beast is going to ascend once again out of the abyss, which is rendered here in the King James Version as bottomless pit. And I think you should know by now, I've covered it a lot, but we'll say it again. The beast that you saw was and is not and shall ascend. Well, what's this was and is not business here? What does that mean, Stephen? Well, the beast that you saw was active, was alive, was obvious, was active, was currently the world ruling power between 554 AD and 1814 AD, and then went into this thing called the abyss, rendered here in this verse, right in the middle line of this verse, as the bottomless pit. So when it was in the bottomless pit, it was not active. But it wasn't totally mortally killed out. It was just mortally wounded, had a deadly wound, but wasn't killed, wasn't stopped forever. It's just like if you got injured so badly, you had all kind of broken bones and what have you, that you nearly died. You know, and you would have died if they hadn't put you in a place of rest and reset all your bones and, you know, maybe re-sewed some arteries up that got cut. You nearly died, lost a lot of blood and all that. You're near dead, called mortally wounded. But they put you in a hospital, and you're there for weeks and weeks and months. And a lot of your friends gave up on you, thought you were going to die, but boy, suddenly you start getting better little by little. And your friends come and see you, and they say, hey, eventually you're getting out of here. You're getting well. Well, this is what Angela Merkel could see when she said, you people better look into the abyss. She knew this beast that's mentioned here in Revelation 17, verse 8 on your screen now. She knew that was a prophetic reference to the former world-ruling emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. And when she said, you people better wake up, she knew that even though that beast system, the entire government, its leader, everything, had been mortally wounded, it wasn't mortally dead. It was just deadly, had a deadly wound. It wasn't dead and in the grave. It was in an abyss, a bottomless pit. They didn't have dirt on top of the pit. That beast, once it's revived, it can come right out of that hole, right out of that abyss. You've seen pictures of rabbit holes before? Rabbit holes are kind of cool. Their curiosity is like they make you want to go inside, and they're never ending. They're bottomless. And once you get to the point where it curves down, where gravity grabs hold of you, you drop through that pit and you wind up in Alice in Wonderland. I mean, they had a rabbit hole in that movie. Well, that's kind of like an abyss. It has no bottom, it has no top. So you're not buried in a grave. You're just in a bottomless pit, and you fall down for a while, but God's got a prophecy where that beast is coming back out of that hole, coming back out of that abyss. And Angela Merkel could see that, and she warned everybody. She said, you people better look into the abyss. She knows there's a beast in there healing, being made well, and the people around it, its health care givers, as if it were, are setting up the 4 unions that are necessary for that beast to once again ascend out of that bottomless pit abyss. It did ascend between 1936 and 1945 in the form of Mussolini. He ascended 3 years before round 2 of World War began. But then in 1945, Mussolini was shot in the belly, hung upside down from the canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy, and that put the beast back into the abyss. Now, some of you may say, yeah, but what about Hitler? Well, Hitler was an extension of Mussolini. Hitler recognized Mussolini as greater than he at a time. Hitler got a lot of his inspiration and motivation from Mussolini. And so you might say, okay, the beast didn't really die until Hitler died. You know, okay, well, you can look at it that way if you want to. That was still the year 1945. But the beast, that whole system, it pinpoints, and as God's end-time apostle prophesied it or revealed it, God revealed it through Mr. Armstrong, that Mussolini was the sixth king of verse 10 of Revelation 8. We'll go there in a moment. And so when that being, Mussolini, was killed, it was not a death of the beast power, it was just another mortal wounding. And in duality, there will be a second resurrection, ascension of a beast out of the abyss. And this time, it'll be like that verse we were just looking at that mentioned the one horn back in Daniel 8. I didn't save it. Back in Daniel 8, it mentions one horn being greater than the other. Let's see, did I save this verse in Revelation? I did. So we'll come back here and go to verse 10 in a moment. Let's go back to Daniel 8. And from verse 11 here, I'm going to punch back up to verse 1, because I think that's where we're going to see a reference to that little horn, one being greater. Let's go from here. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision came to Daniel. And then from there we went to verse 2. In the vision, he, down by the river, Ulai. Then he lifted up his eyes in verse 3, and behold, there stood before the river a ram. All right, this is the verse we want here. A ram, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. So that one horn, in the previous reign of the Holy Roman Empire, you had this Holy Roman Empire with a beast that had been crowned by the Vatican, by a pope of the Vatican, and you had them operating together as the Holy Roman Empire. The holy part of it being the Vatican, and the Roman empire part of it being the emperor over the Roman Empire. And what preceded what's coming, what rose out of that abyss with Mussolini, was like they were both high, but one was higher than the other. That was like the smaller of the two horns. And here you got this bigger horn, and everything that preceded it is part of that smaller horn. But this end-time, latter-day, higher horn, once this final seventh king of Revelation 17, verse 10, we'll go there in just a moment, ascends out of the abyss of Revelation 17, verse 8. Let's go back there. Once this, prophecy is dual. There's duality in prophecy, as God's end-time apostle taught us. The first ascending out of the abyss was Mussolini. And that was like the little smaller horn of Daniel 8, verse 3. The next beast to ascend out of the bottomless pit, it's now back into the is-not state of that Roman Empire is not active. And yet it is. I like the end of this verse 8 says, right at the very end, it says, the beast that was and is not, and the last three words, and yet is. It yet is because, as Mr. Armstrong saw when he would meet with leaders of Europe, and he shared some of those interviews with those people with us, which we play here during our Sabbath service from time to time. You heard Mr. Armstrong sit down with those European leaders. And they would tell him, our goal is to have a united Europe. That united Europe, I was starting to mention a moment ago, requires 4 unions to come together. Economic union, that began a long time ago. United Kingdom became part of the economic union of Europe. But once it started to become the second of 3 unions that are necessary, a political union, it began to develop into a union of politics that the United Kingdom was being taxed heavily to support other members of that political union who were nearly bankrupt. And that money that United Kingdom was pouring into that United Europe, which was intended to be an economic union that the United Kingdom would benefit from, what it was paying in, it wasn't getting back half of what it was paying in. When it originally went in, it thought, we'll pay in and help support this, yeah, and we'll get back more than we're paying in. But when they realized, hey, we're not getting back half of what we're required to pay into this thing, forget it, we want out of here. And besides, we don't have a lot of say with all these members that keep coming into the economic political union of Europe. Our say is being lessened and lessened and lessened by you keep adding more and more members that we have to financially support, and then they rule against our interest. Forget it, we want out of here. And so for a long time we watched Brexit fights in the news for months and months and months, and several years, in fact. And we watched Theresa May work out a deal with Angela Merkel. Both of them are no longer prime ministers of their countries. But that became a big fight in the Parliament of the United Kingdom. The Daily News got ridiculous there for a while. The news was nothing but what's happening in Parliament in the UK now regarding Brexit. Some of you who watched us do World Watch for Daily News watched Brexit proceedings out of the Parliament of the United Kingdom dominate the news day after day after day. So we'd get on our knees and pray about that. God, help this get resolved. And a lot of us began to see, well, help our brother Ephraim in the United Kingdom get out of that mess with the United Europe. Why'd they ever get themselves involved in it to begin with in the first place? Well, in the beginning days of it, when it was just an economic union, it looked like it would be financially beneficial to the United Kingdom. So, yeah, it made sense from every point of it. Economically, even politically, at first, it looked to make sense. But then it began to be obvious. Economically, it's draining the assets of the United Kingdom. And politically, we're being put into a chokehold. We've got ourselves under submission to a political union that's growing in power and all kind of crazy divided up three divisions of leadership of divisions that each have power that are starting to work against the interest of the United Kingdom. There's two more unions that must come together before this beast can ascend out of the abyss, as it says here in the early part of Revelation 17:8. Those other two unions are a military union, as God's end-time apostle has explained to us, and the fourth one is a religious union. We've already seen in the early days of the current Pope, a precedent was started with United Europe, where the Pope has gone over and has spoken in the meetings of the various divisions of the United Europe, of the EU. So they've already begun a military union that will include the Vatican. Behind the scenes, and not so behind the scenes, it's becoming more and more obvious, a military union. Germany, that had to do an unconditional surrender at the end of World War II, never intended to keep an unconditional surrender. And as they began to develop military weapons that they would sell to others, and then it led to their having their own army, and their army would go in and do generous things for other nations. Well, the Allies from World War II began to turn a blind eye to Germany, that was not supposed to rebuild an army, not supposed to be developing weapons of destruction, to where their weapons are some of the very modern, advanced, more powerful. Look at World War II. Their tanks were much more powerful, much greater than the American tanks even, and of the Allies. Unfortunately, though, God gave us a military advantage and blessed us with weather and conditions and things that God intervened to not allow that to go the way it could have gone. But back here to Revelation 17, verse 8, we see duality. There was a beast that ascended from the abyss in the form of Mussolini, who reinstated the beast that was active between 1936 and 1945. Since 1945, we're now back into the situation of this verse where it says the beast is not. But, as the end of the verse says, and yet is, because the thing ain't dead. It's just mortally wounded and it's being healed. Like Angela Merkel said, you people better look into the abyss. That beast you think was badly mortally wounded ain't dead, folks. That beast is reviving. And we've got a united Europe that's setting the stage for that beast to ascend out of that abyss bottomless pit and do horrible things, so that they that dwell on the earth, like the rest of this verse says, shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is pop out of that abyss and be crowned by a pope in the Kaiser's Hall, the Emperor's Hall, up on the second floor of the Romer building, as the seventh king that is mentioned in verse 10 of Revelation 17. Let's go there. And there are 7 kings. Now, many religious students know that 5 are fallen. They were Justinian through Napoleon. Justinian restored the Holy Roman Empire as he restored the imperial form of government, a government in which a religious leader selects and crowns the emperor, the government leader. And that happened in 554 AD. So that started the clock on the 1260-day prophecy that a day for a year was a 1260-year prophecy. And so from 554 until 1260 years later, add 1260 to 554, you get 1814. And what happened in 1814? The 5th of these 5 kings that are fallen, Napoleon, lost the Battle of 1813 in the spring of 1814. That battle started in the fall of 1813, the Battle of 1813. But that Battle of 1813 ended when Napoleon lost Big Battle in the spring of 1813. He tried a comeback effort in the following year, 1815, at Waterloo, and he lost that big time, such that there's an expression today, oh, you're Waterloo, when you have a big failure. Well, that was Napoleon's second big failure. His first big failure was in the spring of 1814 when he lost the Battle of 1813. So the time period from the time Justinian began his reign as the first of the 5 kings that are fallen in 554 until when Napoleon lost the Battle of 1813 in the spring of 1814, 554 to 1814, do the arithmetic, you see it comes out exactly 1,260 years. And so that's the time period of the 5 that are fallen, those 5 dynasties, from Justinian, beginning in 554, to the second king, Charlemagne, the third king, third dynasty, Otto the Great, the fourth king, fourth dynasty, Charles V. He was the 4th king, and Napoleon being the 5th of those 5 that are fallen, who lost the Battle of 1813 in the spring of 1814, putting an end, but not a permanent end, just a temporary end to the Holy Roman Empire in 1814, after 1,260 continuous years of reign. Then we saw what's mentioned in verse 8, an ascension from the abyss. The beast ascended with Mussolini between 1936 and 1945. The beast was again active, and then is not, went back into the abyss. And so Mussolini's was this next part of the verse that says, and one is. Mussolini was active, was present tense between 1936 and 1945. This is a most interesting verse, is it not, brethren? When the Apostle John wrote this after his vision from the Isle of Patmos in 90 A.D., none of these 7 kings had even been born. And yet he's saying there will be 7. And he's saying 5 will come and fall. And then after them, 1 will become present tense. What a verse. What grammar is in this verse? Well, all that grammar up through the 1 is has happened. Now, past tense, past perfect tense was future perfect tense. Crazy tense going on here. 1 is. It wasn't is or present tense until way after John wrote it, until 1936. And in 1945, it no longer was present tense, no longer was 1 is. Now that 1 is became part of those, plus those 5 that are fallen, it made 6 are come and gone. And since there's 7 kings, now the part that references and the other, king number 7, is not yet come. That's where we are right now today, is it not, brethren? And are we not watching for that other that's not yet come? But when he comes, must continue a short space. And he'll come in the form and fashion as mentioned here in Revelation 17, verse 8. The beast that you saw was and is not, and shall ascend. One more time, duality and prophecy. This time he ascends like the greater of the 2 horns. Bigger, more prominent. He's going to be really fulfill this verse, which says he goes into perdition, meaning gross evil. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder at the magnitude of the evil this gargantuan beast is able to inflict on the world. They'll wonder whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world when they behold this great and terrible beast that was and is not, and yet is, because now he's ascended. Not yet, but we're watching for him. That'll happen after the event of the 1290 mentioned by Daniel in chapter 12 and verse 11. And of course, that's after the famine of the word at the 1335. Let's take a look at Daniel 12, verse 11. I've got Daniel 8 up on the screen. In our memory bank, so let's pop it up on the screen. We'll go from there to chapter 12. Just a quick review again of verse 11 of Daniel 8. We'll also read the next verse 12 so we can see the 1290 and the 1335 and the 1290. Yet he magnified himself, speaking of this beast that's going to ascend out of the abyss, even the prince of the host, and by him, the daily sacrifice was taken away. Well, actually, that can refer to that horn, that can refer to the religious leader prior to the coronation ceremony. I'm not sure exactly what this is, what will happen between the 1290 and 1260 exactly, except we know that's when Revelation 12:14 plays out. Those who are accounted worthy to escape are given their 2 wings of an eagle in between the 1290 and the 1260. That beast ascends at the 1260. So it could be the one who coronates him, who by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. The Pope could cause that to happen. And the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Hang on here a second. He magnified himself, even the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. All right, I'm not sure exactly what this place of his sanctuary was cast down, unless that's referring to the place where the daily sacrifice is done, being trashed. But let's see the next verse, 12, because we got a timing element here we want to cover. And an host was given unto him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth. A host like an army is given to this religious leader that trashes the daily sacrifice, and instead of it, as he casts down the truth to the ground, this false religion is able to practice and prosper, even setting up its own daily sacrament that's performed for 1,150 days, morning and evening, 2,300 of them, morning, evening, for a time period of 1,150 days, up to, what's the difference between 1150 and 1290? Gives you 140, up to 140 days before Christ returns, before the abomination that makes desolate is taken away from the holy place over in Israel where all this is set up. Let me see what the next verse is saying. From here we go to verse 13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? Now this is going to give us the understanding. And this next verse says, here with verse 14, Daniel 8, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days. Actually, that word days, as rendered here in the King James Version, would better be translated as you'll see it in other versions. Let me punch up, let's see how the New American Standard Version renders the same verse. He said unto me, for 2,300, this is much better. This is rendered correctly because there's two words in the original Hebrew that's rendered by the one word days in the King James Version, but the New American Standard Version has it correct. He said unto me, 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the holy place will be properly restored. So this time period where the temple is trodden under the foot of the Gentiles is 1,150 days when you understand this properly, that the 2,300 evenings and mornings, each abominable sacrament is counted as a sacrament in the morning, a sacrament in the evening. There's 2,300 of those. So there's 2 per day. So the number of days for these 2,300 evenings and mornings computes out to be 1,150 days. I think I have a Hebrew version of the Bible that I might be able to punch up here. I got a Greek one. Here's a Greek one. Where's my Hebrew version? Let me see. What is this one I have? This is some other language. Let's see. I think that might be the Philippine language, Tagalog or something like that. Let's see. Here's the Greek version, I think. Hang on a second. The reason I want to find the Hebrew is because I think it might be this version right here. Yeah. Because we can look this up in a Hebrew English lexicon. And in fact, I'm going to do that real quick while we are here. I only have a few minutes to go and we're going to finish up. Let me just bear with me a second. I'm going to open up my Hebrew. I'm not able to put it on the screen for you, but I can open up a Hebrew English lexicon for this verse. Let's see, we're at verse 14 of Daniel 8. And just hang up, bear with me a second. I almost have it up here. Daniel 8, verse 14. Okay, I got it. And the words that are rendered as days in the King James Version come from the two words Arab, E-R-E-B, and Boger, B-O-G-E-R. So Arab, you got your evening, and Boger, you got your morning. So you see there are two words. They're not the one word for days in the Hebrew. They're two separate words, as the version we had on the screen from the New American Standard Version renders it. Boker, actually it's Boker is the way you pronounce that, B-O-G-E-R is Boker. Properly dawn is the break of day, generally morning, day, early, morning, morrow. So the morning part of the day, that's the dawn. That's boker. And Arab, the Hebrew word Arab, meaning from the article, from the web, meaning the evening, day, the evening part of the day. That's Arab, E-R-E-B, and the boker is the morning part of the day. All right, but let's go back to the New American Standard Version. Actually, I'd like to see it in the Revised Standard Version also. Let me see how they render it. And he answered him for 2,300 evenings and mornings. So both the Revised Standard Version and the New American Standard Version are rendering this correctly by entering Arab and boker as evenings and mornings. And as God's end-time apostle explained it, those 2,300 evenings and mornings, 2 events per day, means there's only 1,150 days involved there. And that works out so that those days end 140 days before Jesus Christ returns. That gives some time for, as the end part of this verse says, for the holy place to be properly restored. The holy place to which Jesus Christ is returning. Now we're going to have a battle of Armageddon as Jesus Christ returns, and the pouring out of the 7 last plagues, as this chart from the book of Revelation brother, I'm very sorry. While I was punching up those verses on the screen, I had that chart on there preventing them from showing up. And I had all those nice foreign versions. Here's the New American Standard Version that shows you the verses worded as evenings and mornings. You know, as I set up a new studio downstairs, and yes, Dane and Jacob, I'm working. I've already lowered the nice world map on a flannel world map behind me. I was looking forward to having a camera set up, but that's going to take me another week or two to get that part together. Barring the freezing weather will not allow me to use this downstairs studio when it gets cold. Today is nice. We're up in the 60s, mid 60s. So I'm in the downstairs studio. And otherwise, I'm operating from a small room upstairs because I've got a fixed ceiling in the main studio part up there, a major ceiling, and I do need to do some more permanent roof repair. I've got some temporary repairs going, but I've got major ceiling damage I still have to repair. So I'm doing a third job so I can pay for that myself and get that finished, and I want to wall in this downstairs studio so we can go back to operating news and with a camera and all that. There's something we're going to do special today. After a break, give you time to do some private study, some prayer. If you want to join me later, I'm coming back, but only on our own webpage at sabbath.tv. That takes us over to cogtv.org. I'm going to come on for about a half hour and cover some news from today that I wasn't able to get this graphic up on the screen. Unfortunately, I wanted to show you, but I did want to make sure I put these scriptures back up on here. Okay, all right, now I've got the scripture up on the screen. All right, here's the American Standard Version that mentions 2,300 evenings and mornings. In the King James Version, you're only seeing this. Let me finish what I was saying. At 3:30 Alabama time, that'll be 4:30 Eastern time. Figure out your time zone from there. I'm coming back for a live stream for only about a half hour, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Not on Facebook, not on YouTube, just on our homepage only. I want you to see how that works. I want to test it out, and I'm going to cover some news that I only have licensing to cover on our own homepage. I can't do it on Facebook. I can't do it on YouTube. But I'm going to cover some local news that covers some stories that relate to Israel and things happening over there. Maybe I can put something I'll show you in a moment before we sign off show you what I'm going to cover at 3:30. I think you might want to come back and just eyeball that, because there's some very significant things going on. We really need to be watching, as Christ instructed us to do, so that we are capable of being accounted worthy to escape all that's going to happen with the opening of that fifth seal, which could happen sooner than later. It could. The only reason it may not be happening right now is because God is honoring the prayers of many of you. Hopefully you are praying that, and we should be, that our escape be not in the winter. When I go back to Matthew 24 in a moment, we'll pop verse 20 on the screen and remind ourselves that, oh yeah, we should be praying, God, help our escape be not in the winter. That's probably the only reason God hasn't already called it. And as soon as the spring hits, He could wrap it up, brethren, so we better be praying. We don't know that, and I'm not predicting or saying that. I'm just saying things are ripe where we could go, and so you better not put this off. We need to be examining ourselves for Passover, making sure we've put out more sin this year than we did last year, and if we haven't, make some effort. Be on your knees more in prayer. God, help me see the things that displease you in my life that you consider to be sin, and help me put it out before Passover. More and more of it. Even if you don't get it perfect, at least be making a major effort to get sin out. That's part of our examination between now and Passover. And we should be watching and praying so that it's part of a prerequisite. Two elements, two things you got to do as prerequisites to being accounted worthy to escape. Otherwise, you're going to be like those people in Revelation 12:17 who find themselves as a remnant of God's true church. There's no remnant presently. We're all one body, scattered. Unfortunately, we're also divided. But I'm not going to say much about that today. The main thing to realize is we are scattered worldwide. That's not a church group you can join or become a member of. I do have that name incorporated, so nobody try to incorporate a church group out of that. And I haven't made it a church group you can join or become a member of. I'm keeping it as a generic reference to the condition we are in today. We're scattered. We're all one body but scattered. You shouldn't be considering yourself a member of any of these divisions. As Mr. Armstrong reminded us, brethren, none of us were ever members of the Worldwide Church of God. It was a non-member corporation. He said what we're members of is the Church of God. We're not baptized into any denomination of men. So these divisions that exist out there, brethren, you should not be, according to God's end-time apostle, you should not be considering yourselves members of these divided groups, these vanity plate, blankety blank, this or that named Church of God groups. All right, now, I wanted to go back while we can see this on the screen. And just for a quick moment, put the King James Version up here. You see the 2300 evenings and mornings? The King James Version has misrendered that, those two Hebrew words, Arab and Boker, as they've rendered it with just one word, days, unto 2,300 days. That actually is a mistranslation, not just a misrendering, it's a mistranslation. It's not 2,300 days. It's 2,300, 2,300 evenings and mornings, as both the American Standard Version and the New Revised Standard Version render it. 2,300 evenings and mornings. All right, so my apologies for not having that display on the screen earlier when we were showing this and going through it. And then momentarily, I put the Hebrew version on the screen, which has those words, Arab and Boker, in the Hebrew. And then I looked it up in an interlinear translation of the Bible. It has the English words and the Hebrew words right next to one another. And Arab and Boker are evening and morning. So the 2300, as it renders in these more accurate translations, Like, let's go back to the New American Standard Version, 2,300 evenings and mornings. And so with 2 events per day, that means those 2,300 events of evenings and mornings only take up 1,150 days. All right, that's the point I wanted to make. And then 140 days before Christ returns, the holy place will be properly restored. And so all of that abominable stuff, Christ will not be returning to face that abominable stuff. And in the Battle of Armageddon, all those that fight against him, their blood will pile up knee high. And so the first thing we'll be doing, and as we reign and rule with Christ, will be like he did during the days of restoration of this earth at the recreation, when he had to clean the earth up. He comes back, has to clean up another mess caused by, this time, by men led by Satan. The first mess he cleaned up, Satan himself was responsible for after Satan tried to take over God's throne and was thrown back down here and caused the world to be flooded. The first flood was a satanic flood. The Noah flood, the Noahic flood, came after the creation of man, about 1,500 years later, after man was created. But that satanic flood, we don't know how long that was before God came here and cleaned it up. Well, when Christ returns, we're going to be cleaning up the bloody mess of the Battle of Armageddon. And brethren, we who are part of the first resurrection, our first job is going to be helping Christ clean up that mess. So we're going to reenact the recreation when the evening and the morning were the first day, and God, cleaned up the earth then. And we're going to be cleaning it up with Christ again as part of the first job we do at the first part of the millennium. But you want to be accounted worthy for that, and as I have to, let's see, did I cover all the verses I said I would cover? We're going to pop Revelation 12:14 on the screen in a moment. And I said I'd cover Matthew 24, verse 20 for a second. Let's go there first. I can take us back from the memory bank to Matthew 24, verse 21. That reminds us that the time period we're speaking of when we see the previous verse 20 that says, "Pray that your flight be not in the winter, for then shall be great tribulation," as we see in the verse 21. The time period we're speaking of is the time period of the fifth seal, great tribulation, that Christ is telling us in verse 20 to pray that your flights be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then, as the next verse says, shall be great tribulation. So he's saying, pray that you can get out of here before this fifth seal, great tribulation, commences. And pray that all of that event will not happen in the winter, because if we're trying to escape in the winter, we had a hard freeze here that should have told you if you went outside for a few minutes without gloves on, man, your hands start hurting quickly. You can get frostbite. And if you have to escape during the winter, it's not going to be very pleasant. And Christ, with a lot of wisdom and a lot of love, was saying, pray that you don't have to be doing that in the winter. So a reminder that we should pray in that way. And brethren, we'll finish up by... let me take us back over to Revelation 17, and from there I can easily change the chapter to chapter 12, and then add that to that verse 14, and put that on the screen. And we'll finish up today's Sabbath service with this. To the woman. In prophecy, many of you know woman means a church. In Revelation 17, where we just were, it was speaking of a woman that's the false church that associates with that beast that ascends out of the abyss and holds the coronation ceremony for that beast. That's that woman that rides the beast. And when you ride a beast, you hold the reins, meaning you control where that beast goes and how fast it goes, the direction it goes, everything. But here in Revelation 12, this woman is referring to God's true church and to a certain portion of his true church, all part of the Philadelphia era now. an era that continues to exist right up until Christ's return. Alongside that era, once the fifth seal, Great Tribulation, begins, the Laodicean era will commence as an era of martyrdom that begins when the fifth seal commences. But to this woman, but only to the portion of the woman who is accounted worthy to escape, is given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into Judea, into her. But from there, before we get into her place, where she's nourished for a time and times and half a time, that's 1 year plus 2 years plus a half a year, that's 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. Just before that, we're flown into Judea, where we watch for an army to surround Jerusalem. You want to see where that is? Let's go back to Matthew 24 for a moment, and we'll backtrack up to verse 15. And we'll see in verse 15, we'll go back there from this verse 21. Verse 15, Christ tells us that when you shall therefore, it's coming up on your screen now, when you shall therefore see the abomination that makes desolate of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. That is an event that happens pretty much at the same time as Luke refers to it. Let's go over there for a moment. Luke 20, we got just a couple more minutes to finish out our 2-hour period here. Luke 21, and we're going to go to, where is that? Around verse 30, is it maybe? Let's see, verse 29 is the parable of the fig tree that tells us when all these things happen. When you see the 4 seals of Revelation, just like when you see a tree, when you see it shoot forth, its leaves shoot forth and the blossoms, you know that summer is nigh. And he said, likewise, when you see these things happen, the things he was explaining in the Olivet prophecy of Luke 21 and Matthew 24 and Mark 13, when you see these things come to pass, he was saying, know that the countdown clock's about to begin that counts down toward the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God gets ushered in when Christ returns. We have to go through 1,335 days from the famine of God's word. We have to go through 1,290 days, of 45 days later, from the time the daily sacrifice is taken away. We have to go through 1,260 days of great tribulation before Christ returns and ushers in and restores the kingdom. So when he says it's near, he means the countdown clock is about to begin. And now verse 32 is where we wanted to go to make a point I brought up earlier. Truly, verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things, all these seals be fulfilled. The 4 seals that are active trigger the famine of the word, the daily sacrifice being taken away at the 1290, the 5th seal, Great Tribulation, commencing at the 1260. They trigger all that, and this generation shall see that, shall be alive when Christ returns. And this generation, how do we know that is this time period now? There's a famous Protestant preacher by the name of John Hagee. Some of you probably watched him. He's tremendous with religious type jokes and things. He's a marvelous speaker. He actually is. People are much entertained by him. But he preaches something a little different than the understanding God gave Mr. Armstrong about this generation. He preaches that this generation of this verse, same verse that's in Matthew 24 also, parallel verse in Matthew 24 also, he teaches that this generation shall not pass away, shall not die off, until all these things that relate to Christ's return are fulfilled. You know, all the 4 seals happen, the Great Tribulation happens, and Christ returns. But he says this generation is identified by the birth of the modern-day nation of Israel, commencing in 1948. Well, he's close. That's just 3 years after the time the generation really starts, as God expounded it and explained it through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, who said that the annihilation generation, the generation that stems from the time when mankind was able, through modern-day nuclear weaponry, able to destroy all life, all flesh from off this earth. And that began in August of 1945, when mankind successfully tested and set off a nuclear explosion, a hydrogen bomb that could destroy whole cities at one time. That's Mr. Armstrong's understanding of when the annihilation generation began. And what Christ was speaking of is an annihilation generation, when all flesh could be destroyed by man, except for the fact that Jesus Christ will return and stop it. Let's go back real quickly before we go to Revelation 12 and finish. Let's go back to Matthew 24, verse 21, and go to verse 22, where Christ has a real positive conclusion for us. Here in verse 21, he says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time." And he says in verse 22, if he didn't intervene, mankind would utterly destroy all life from off the earth. Here in verse 22, except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved alive, physically saved alive. But, here's the positive ending of this, for the elect's sake. Brethren, who are the elect? That's those who are called to the spring harvest, is it not? Those days shall be shortened. So there's a wonderful promise there. We don't have to worry about all life being destroyed from off the face of this earth. But what about Ezekiel 6:6, Stephen, where all the cities of the birthright descendants of Ephraim in the United Kingdom, including Canada and South Africa and New Zealand and Australia, and the modern-day descendants of Manasseh in the United States, all our cities shall be laid waste. What about this? Well, this happens at the 1260, at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. The great escape, for those accounted worthy to escape, happens in between the 1290, taking away of the daily sacrifice, and the 1260. So just before the 1260, those accounted worthy to escape are flown away to that place of protection. Now, what about your loved ones? Well, only 2/3 of the people in this devastation by this great destruction will be killed. 1/3 of them by the second seal, immediate death by the hydrogen bombs as they hit the cities. A second third, as Ezekiel explained it, are killed by the third and fourth seal, by famine and disease epidemic. These are people that live not directly in the city, but more in your suburbs, in the rural areas, or in some parts of the city that don't get hit directly. That second third are killed by the fallout and by the air, and you can't drink the water. But then there's a third, maybe they're even further out, who are spared and are taken captive back to Europe, back to the old Holocaust type situation in Europe, and are left alive. Some of them will be killed off during the Great Tribulation, but some not. And your loved ones could be part of those who are spared and protected as part of the third that live on. So there's some hope there for your loved ones. You know, it could be a blessing if they just die from it and they don't have to suffer. On the other hand, if they're strong and tough and if they would like to live on over into the world tomorrow, and if you'd like that for them, you can be praying for them. And they may be able to be protected from it all. They have to live through a Holocaust type time. They have to live through living under the beast. But then as a relative of yours, they can be blessed over into living into the world tomorrow. And so there's something positive for those of you who have loved ones. Some of you expressed some concern about that. Oh, the only thing I don't like about our leaving is, our loved ones. Well, a lot of them may be blown up when the bombs hit. So, they'll just be dead. And others that might be able to be alive, you can be praying for them, that God keep them protected through the suffering that they'll go through, still living through the Great Tribulation. All right, Revelation 12:14. We got to get to that. For those who are accounted worthy to escape, I said we'd end on this verse. So I'm going to take us back to Revelation 17, and from there I'll punch up chapter 12 and verse 14, and we'll pop. Oh, let's see, I did that backward. I put 14 as the chapter. I need to put chapter 12 and then verse 14, and now we'll pop that on the screen. To the woman, actually I had this on screen a moment ago. To the woman I was explaining, that's the church, the true church. We're given two wings of a great eagle. She's flown into the wilderness of Judea. We watch for an army surrounding Jerusalem. Oh, where I didn't go was verse 15 of Matthew 24. All right, so we're going to go back there. All right, we covered Revelation 12:14, but in verse 15 of Matthew 24, we'll pop that on the screen. Here's what we're told. When you see the abomination that makes desolate, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. We need to go to next verse 16. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. And I was going to show that the parallel verse in Luke 21 also makes a reference to fleeing to the mountains when an army surrounds Jerusalem. So it's a twofold event. An abomination that makes desolate be set up, and it also has to have the army surrounding Jerusalem. Then you flee to the mountains, into the mountains. And where are the mountains? The mountains are at the southern tip of Edom. And brethren, I got to just stop right there because we are out of time. Mr. Armstrong taught us that we should try to close on time, except when there's something very urgent going on. For those of you that want to come back with me for a short live transmission only on our own website at sabbath.tv, cogtv.org, we're going to come back at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, just for a short half hour or so, and I'll cover some current news events that you should really be on top of. Until then, brethren, or otherwise, until next week here on Facebook Live and YouTube Live on the Sabbath Service page and Sabbath Service channel, respectively, let me wish you a good, wonderful rest of the Sabbath day and a great week ahead of you, and a Shabbat Shalom.